If you think of the book of Job as the script of a play or a movie, it might help. And as you think of it that way, think about when you watch a movie or read a book and how you relate to those characters and what they experience. Because sometimes it's easier to relate to something when we understand it as a story rather than assuming it's a factual event. Job also shows us how complex the Bible is. As I was scrolling through Twitter the other day, I saw this tweet to explain Job. I don't have the clicker. There's a slide there. Job is the counter-narrative to Proverbs. Proverbs says, "No harm befalls the righteous, but the wicked are full of misery." And Job says, "Yeah, well, okay, but I've got a story to tell you." So in this play, there are a few different characters. God, Satan, Job, Job's wife, Job's friends, and the playwright, the person writing this play, because they have their own reason for writing it. Next slide, please. When we read the verses for today, we see in the last one that Job says he is utterly dejected. That's the first thing that jumps out to me anyway. And so the question to ask is, why is Job utterly dejected? For that, we have to go back to the very strange beginning of the book, the prologue that I mentioned earlier. In this, the Satan, you'll notice I'm not saying it the way you're used to hearing it, and that's because this is an earlier Jewish understanding, not a much, much later Christian version. This understanding simply means that this character, Satan, is an adversary. It's the same concept Jesus uses when he tells Peter later on, "Get behind me, Satan." This is a character who has access to both God and humanity. This isn't someone who has been banished from God's presence. This is someone who is adversarial, someone opposed to God, but still goes to meetings with God and the other heavenly beings. And for whatever reason, God keeps the Satan around. It reminds us of later, maybe, when Jesus keeps Judas around. This image of God that Job has is not one we like to see, because at first glance, it appears that God is the one doing this to Job. That's certainly what Job and his friends think throughout the book. And that's a common misconception that we still have today, because we struggle to understand evil. In their book, Living the Questions, David Felton and Jeff Proctor Murphy tell us, evil is, but there isn't a unique being shaping and defining it. Satan is simply the embodiment of the not good over the good. And so in this story, we have this good and evil reacting to each other in the world. We're set up to see Job as representing the good. We're told that he is blameless and upright, that he feared God, and that he turns away from evil, and that he even offers sacrifices on behalf of his kids in case they have sinned. And then there's this odd conversation, actually two of them at separate times, between the Satan and God about how faithful Job is. And God says, regardless of what happens to Job, he will stay faithful. And then soon after that, Job faces tragedy after tragedy. The Satan is set up as the not good and appears to be winning in this weird wager that he has with God. And Job's oblivious as to why all of this is happening to him. He doesn't even know there's a character called the Satan. He only knows of God. But as we're reading, we know that it's not God doing all of this to him, and it's not even the Satan doing all of this to Job. What we see happening is the Sabaeans steal the donkeys and oxen and kill the servants. Fire burns up the sheep and more servants. The Chaldeans then steal the camels and kill some more servants. And a great wind, maybe like a tornado, collapses a house and kills all of his children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. It's other people and natural disasters that are causing all of this to happen to Job. In other words, he's living a normal, regular life. It's like that saying, when it rains, it pours. We have tragedies that happen every single day. In September, Category 5 Hurricane Dorian killed 65 people, with 282 still missing as of a month ago. And it caused over $7 billion in damage. In the first 9 months of 2019, there were at least 21 deadly mass shootings across America, in which a total of 124 people were killed. And California is currently dealing with fires in which hundreds of homes have been destroyed. We've all lost loved ones to death, some expected, others tragically unexpected and incomprehensible. Life is filled with tragedy, but it's also filled with good things. Because if it wasn't, then the tragedies and grief wouldn't affect us so profoundly. I think we can all understand Job's words about being utterly dejected. And yet, despite being utterly dejected, we see that Job still has some kind of faith, even though he doesn't know or understand why all of this is happening to him. And we also see that Job's great faith doesn't mean that he gets a pass from the things that happen in life. Job says something interesting. He says that after his skin has been torn apart this way, then he'll see God with his own eyes, not a stranger's eyes. Job's vision and understanding of God will be more personal after he has been through this journey. He will see God with his own eyes, his own new and unique experience, not through the eyes of his friends, and not even through the eyes he had before all of this happened to him. But in order to get there, he goes through it, and he has some conversations with his friends and with God. Job's friends are not helpful. They basically keep insisting that Job must have done something wrong to cause all of this happening to him. And they go back and forth a lot, each person saying what they think. Now, as an aside, this is one reason it's dangerous to just take random verses out of the Bible thinking they are inspirational. Because you might like something that Job's friends say, but in the end, we find out that God tells them they're all wrong. So Job and his friends are having this long conversation, maybe like something you might have in a Bible study group or with some close friends. And Job even challenges God. Job knows who God is, that God is a God of justice, and so he demands that God live up to that character. Job can challenge God in this way because he has so much faith in God. We don't always think that we can challenge God. Directly or indirectly, we may have been taught that we can't question why something happens, that we can't be angry with God because it's heretical. But that's a harmful view because we should be able to express anything to God. Because faith is not resignation or cowering before God. Faith trusts God and engages God in genuine conversation, even debate. And it's that kind of faith that Job, having lost everything, is able to hold on to, even though he never finds out why he's experiencing all of this. We can't change what happens to us, but we can learn and we can grow from it. All people suffer. Nobody escapes it. And because of that, it's a common link that we have with all of humanity. In the end, Job has this happily ever after ending. He gets everything back and has 10 new kids, but it has this kind of unreal feel to it because that's not something that any of us would magically experience. So we need to look at it a little differently as him just getting everything back. I think it's more like Job was able to go on living and get through his grief and tragedy and not stay stuck in it. Maybe he was less of a worrier, less concerned with offering sacrifices all the time, and maybe he started appreciating and living his life more abundantly. There's a slide. Job said he wanted his words written down, and we have them, but it's more than that. It's not just that Job's story is written. What's important to remember is that each and every one of us has a story. Each and every one of us has gone through or will go through something, or a lot of somethings. And when people tell their stories to each other, and we listen to them, really listen, we can gain empathy and compassion. What Job seems to want is not so much the notoriety, but the opportunity to tell people what's been happening to him, and that despite what's been happening, he knows there is something more in the future to look forward to. He says, after my skin has been torn apart, then from my flesh I'll see God. Sometimes, no matter how good of a life that we lead, it's only after we've been torn apart that we come to know God differently than we thought we should, and be able to have that faith. It's during Job's time of suffering when he has his really honest conversations with God. Joseph Campbell was a mythologist who lived in the early 1900s, who spent time extracting the idea of the hero's journey from different types of literature. It's a common theme in any story that says the hero, or a regular person, just like you and just like me, that says that this person will be living a regular, known life, but will then face trials, have some sort of death or death-like experience, become transformed, and then return to life changed. And I think the hero's journey is exactly what happens with Job. He's gotten as low as he could possibly get, and he still returns. In the end, Job has a relationship with his children, seeing them and their children down 4 generations, and even giving his daughters names and inheritances. At the beginning, they weren't named, and Job wasn't even with them at their parties, even though he offered sacrifices for them. The last line of the book is that Job died, old and full of days. We do not want tragedy to happen to any of us, but we can be assured that when it does happen, no matter how awful, it's not the end, even if we can't see that while we're going through it. We can be better friends to people than the examples we see in Job's friends, and we can and we should grieve and ask questions and challenge God. But we can also have faith that no matter how bad it is, we can come through it transformed and live our lives as fully as we can, holding on to that gift of faith to help get us through.